At long last, in 2023, the fifth Insidious movie's coming out. The trailer dropped a few days ago. I did not do a video on it, but I did watch the trailer. We're going to be discussing the Insidious franchise today and where they could go with Insidious 5, The Red Door. This, of course, follows up the previous four movies that came out, in the past like 10, 12 years or so, starring Lynn Shay as the main character, also with Patrick Wilson, who is going to also direct this movie. So much like what we got in Creed 3 with Michael B. Douglas directing and also playing main character, we're going to get the same thing here with the fifth Insidious. And the story is still being written by Lee Winnell, so he's involved. But what else can they do and where can they take this franchise? We'll discuss that today. Joining me from KRW Productions, Reel to Reel, Mark, what's up?
What's up, man? Always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, especially for this one, because I feel like I got a lot to say that a lot of people aren't talking about with this Insidious franchise.
Right. So the story that the premise of this movie is that 10 years have passed since the end of Insidious 2. And at the end of Insidious 2, we saw Lynn Shay's character, Elise, save the family or help to. And then there was this sort of cliffhanger with this new monster, which may not even get covered in this movie. Now it's been 10 years. The little boy who was in the first movie has grown up. And of course, Patrick Wilson's still there playing his dad, but he's getting new hauntings. So the trailer kind of came off, even though I know it wasn't, it kind of came off like a soft reboot. It had that vibe to it.
Yeah, which is weird. You've made it very clear that Lynn Shay was the main character of this franchise. One of
Yeah,
the more
yeah.
interesting things about the Insidious franchise, if you really take that into context, like, there's this like elderly woman. You don't necessarily see, a woman, much less like an elderly woman, be the main focus of the franchise, who is the strong archetype, the matriarchal character that's bringing like kind of pushing the story forward. Mostly you have like scream queens and stuff, and they come and go with stuff like this. But she was the main focus for the first four movies. And now it seems like they're going back to the Lamberts, which I'm of two minds about this. I mean, what are your thoughts on it? Because in some ways, I'm excited to go back to the Lambert family. Patrick Wilson is a genuine scream king at this point. I mean, with these movies as well as the Conjuring movies, he has dedicated a lot of the last 13 or so years to horror, and it's really starting to show. I'm really appreciative that not only is he returning, but he's also returning to direct. Like you said, with Michael B. Jordan in Creed 3, it's kind of in the same ballpark. But I feel like we are giving up on that teaser of an ending from Insidious Chapter 2 now that we've finally gotten to a point where that's a focal point of the story and we're moving forward. And I'm not entirely sure the Lambert family has a lot more to offer. And I don't even see that from the trailer itself. This idea that, well, now Dalton's going to go off to university, and then everybody is starting to get a little bit more antsy, and they're going to go back to the further for one reason or another. I'm not necessarily seeing the through line between 1, 2, and now 5 that we would have gotten if it was just a direct continuation of 2's cliffhanger ending onward. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, what I feel like happened is that they kind of shifted what they were going to do at some point, because the first two Insidious movies work as one big story, like Halloween 2 and several other movies. You could actually watch them both in one sitting and it feels like one big movie. And then when Chapter 3 came out, it was like a prequel. Now, if they had stopped there, it would have just been the story of the Lamberts and a prequel. But when they had Chapter 4, that was sort of what tied in Chapter 3 to Chapter 1, because Chapter 4 goes right into Chapter 1. So at that point, I feel like with the fourth movie, with Lynn Shay being the lead, we follow her story more than even the characters, the quote unquote victims in Chapter 4. Now, I didn't like Chapter 4, The Last Key. I did not like that movie. I love the villain. Didn't like it that much. There were too many weird scripting issues going on. But if you ask me, I think the only reason they're going back to Lamberts is purely for nostalgia. I think they're doing it because they realize that the most successful Insidious movies were the first two, because they know that it's it's kind of like their story in a way, or it was supposed to be. So it just feels like that's what they're doing. It feels like it's pretty much just saying, okay, we're going back to basics. Kind of like I'm watching the Fast and Furious movies, and when they get to Fast and Furious, it feels like a direct sequel to the first one. Whereas I
Hmm.
feel like this one, the Red Door, is going to be a direct sequel to the second one, even though the cliffhanger in the second one may not get resolved in this one because it's been 10 years. Maybe that'll be in another movie. I have no clue, dude. It's weird. It's a weird choice.
Yeah, I know. I think you're absolutely right that this is more of a nostalgia bait. People like the Daltons, people like these characters, and they think that it's going to resonate. I was actually seeing some quotes coming out of CinemaCon this past week because obviously now everybody's showing off everything. Blumhouse is very excited about everything coming out, and they're saying, we think that Insidious 5 is going to be the biggest of the franchise. Now, obviously, the only reason you would think that is one, The Last Key, I believe. I mean, correct me in the comments, but I believe it was the biggest in the franchise in terms of
Was it?
worldwide box up.
I
I
thought it
believe
was. I thought it
so.
was the first one.
Well, the first one was like kind of an indie darling. And then it kind of got, I don't think three was as big as two, but I'm pretty sure four was bigger. And now they're going back to the things that people really liked. To your point where you had the first two movies going back to back, you can watch them as a double feature and it makes
Yeah.
complete sense. And then you have these prequel movies with three and four. Personally, people might agree, they might disagree. I am all for that. I love Lee Winnell's type of story writing. It goes back to his Saul days where he was talking. You can go back to his writer's commentary on this Saul 3, where is the last one that he wrote. It was his farewell to the entire franchise and talking about like this idea that, well, none of this movie makes sense to me. Like from somebody he knew who hadn't seen the previous two, is like, none of this really makes sense to me. And it feels like all of this is just kind of coming out of nowhere. And there's scenes that I don't know the characters and blah, blah, blah. And he would laugh at him and said, if you don't understand what's going on at this point, that's your problem, not mine. And I love that perspective when it comes to horror movie franchises because horror movie franchises are kind of the only genre where you can expect this weird, intricate, self-indulging story where you can go and do and tell stories that you want to tell, go backwards in time, forwards in time, and do anything you want to kind of retcon the story as you go forward
Yeah. The
in
the
live action.
the Insidious, the best thing about Insidious to me is the lore. Everything in the further, the whole absence of time. And I thought that other than, like, different than other horror franchises, the further to me is very interesting because it acts as
Hmm.
both like an alternate dimension, but also a version of the afterlife. It's very interesting. Also, I think Insidious has a bit of an underrated rogues gallery. I think that every villain in each of the movies that we've seen so far has been interesting in their own ways, different ways to scare you. So I was really hoping that when they went forward with the franchise, they would introduce another villain and kind of do a monster of the week type of thing. With
Mm.
each new movie, you have a new victim, like a new main character who's not Lin Shay, the family that's being haunted or whatever, or the person being haunted, and a new villain. I feel like in this movie they are going to bring in a new villain, but I also feel like I have a weird feeling they're going to try and squeeze in some of the ones from before. That's what I
Oh
think.
yeah. Oh yeah. It looks like they're going to bring in the demon from the first one and
Yeah.
maybe even the Black Bride. It's
Well, I
it's
thought the
the
Black Bride thing got resolved.
oh yeah, it totally did. And like that's the biggest problem with this movie is that the second movie totally resolved the Lambert story.
Yeah, right. So they have to
So
figure out a way to go back to the story, which I'm sure they
and
will.
it's really interesting that you say that because this is one of the biggest things that I wanted to talk about when it comes to this movie and then going back to the Lamberts. It's them, as we were talking about before. Lin Shay was the anchor of the first four films. And the idea that you're going to go back and kind of treat her, at least the way the trailer is treating her, you're going to try to treat her in the Randy format from Scream 3, where she recorded something pre-death on a VHS tape or something like that, right? Where she's trying to give the main characters a lesson of what the further is and so how they can fight it. When the second
Yeah,
film
yeah,
ended directly as somewhat of a promise that we were going to get that monster of the week type of narrative going forward, where everything was going to be a new adventure with a new family, and that this Ghostland Shay was going to be working with her two lackeys, and that they were going to go crime fighting ghost style. I feel like that would have been way more
Yep,
fun as
that's what I
a
thought they were gonna do.
ongoing franchise.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
and again, it goes back to my love for the franchise and Lee Winnell's weird, wacky, retconning storytelling writing abilities, or fallbacks. Like, he has to go back and explain everything and tie everything together like he's a madman. I like that, but again, this would have really benefited from just taking it and running with it with each individual story that could have been episodic in nature in 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure. I agree. I just feel so much like a nostalgia grab. You know what I mean? I just hope that the important thing is, can they really give us some good? Well, the scares. I mean, I don't really get scared that much in horror movies, but the atmosphere of Insidious has always worked. The question is, can they add to the lore? Because I agree with you. Chapter 2 ended with an open and shut case. So they're gonna have to figure out a way to kind of go back and reveal, well, we had to do this, but really what happened was we messed up and this happened, or I never told you this, but this happened. It's weird. And then what's gonna happen with like the rest of the family, like the mom. Is she like it's just it's I don't know what they're gonna do, but I guess it's implied based on the synopsis from Sony that it's gonna be the same demon from the first one, as you said, coming back somehow. But I don't remember him
Yeah.
actually, quote unquote, dying in the first one. So maybe he just got like frozen or something. I don't know. And now he's broken out. I don't know. I have no
Well,
idea.
like you said, like the further is kind of this other place in time, right? Like it kind of time stands still in this area, right? So he might have just been gone for a minute or two in his own time, but now he's back like 10 years later for them. It,
Yeah.
it there's a lot of different possibilities here. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about when it comes to this franchise, as well as Blumhouse's franchise making capability as a whole. One of the things that we've talked about as a fandom for Insidious for the last couple of years is Blumhouse has Insidious, they have Sinister. Sinister is kind of a failed experiment with only 2 films in the entire franchise. Insidious has a lot of cultural clout with its 5th film coming out in 2023. What if you do a crossover? You own the rights, the studio owns the rights to both, and these 2 things can live in somewhat of the same world, especially going off of the first 2 with the further these demons or entities or whatever you really want to call them
Right.
coming in and trying to possess young children. But that's exactly what Bagul does. It seems to be married in a really interesting way and something that could be fun to explore. At the same time, just way off in the other distance, you have Happy Death Day to You, and then you have the Freaky movie that a lot of people have been talking about. They want to cross over for this. But at the same time, you also have the writer and director of the Purge franchise saying, yeah, I know we did 5 movies and 2 TV seasons, but I really want to go back and do a direct sequel to Purge the election year. And they're not necessarily letting me do it right now because that franchise is kind of dead on end, even though each and every single one of those movies has been profitable. Even though Insidious 2 has been profitable. Even though the 2 seasons of television they did for the Purge franchise were decently reviewed and also well watched. They canceled them because Blumhouse's mentality is we're going to spend as little money as possible, and unless it's a breakout hit that cannot be stopped, like the Halloween franchise, probably like this new upcoming Exorcist trilogy they're going to do with David Gordon Green, we're just going to cut all ties if it starts to show any signs of weakness. And the thing is maybe that happens with this Insidious movie. I'm expecting it to at some level. But you can't tell me that the 5th movie is going to be the biggest in the franchise when you're talking about going back to a nostalgic piece that was already well wrapped up within the 2nd film, and you had successfully pivoted to another character that you were building up to then do weekly, or like the weekly episodic installments of additional sequels in a picture perfect format that could have just sustained itself on a cheap budget for eternity. And now, like, I don't necessarily understand what they're doing, because now they're even talking about Megan. I didn't see Megan. I can't
I liked
speak
it
to it
for
yet.
what it was.
Okay, but they're talking about sequels to that. Understandable. I get that as a franchise, but the Black Door, or the Black Phone, that they're doing sequels to that. I don't
It's
understand
not
that.
necessary. Yeah, everything's getting franchised now, man. It goes back to our discussion about Rocky, how every time they make more, they have a higher risk of screwing it up. But horror movies, like I can't even count how many like piranha movies there are at this point. Like I think it's because of how it's because of how easy it is to make these things. They're so low budget, and the thing is with this movie, The Red Door. What kind of things do you want to see in it? Like what are you looking forward to? Because all I'm really looking forward to is finding out, like, okay, why is the Lambert's kid still having issues, and like, what's the solution, and what actually happened? And I'm looking forward to that. But it is, I don't know. I love what the first two movies did, and because of that, I'm always gonna go see these. But many horror franchises, the more time passes, the harder it is to make sequels. And then they
I
start seeing some bad ones here and there.
Well, the thing is I think Insidious has really shot itself in the foot for
Really?
reasons that I love. I've already said the utter dedication to tying the story back in, to starting in one place and trying your best to kind of contort yourself around back to that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense to me. I appreciate it for what it is, but it's a piss poor idea for continuing the story past the conclusion of the second film. So it really needs to justify itself, especially coming back to these characters. And if it does go back to Lin Shaye, if it does figure out how to incorporate some of the mythology that was explored within chapter 3 and The Last Key, as well as giving a legitimate reason as to reawaken all of this nonsense after putting it to bed in chapter 2, that's really interesting. I will be all for it. But I have to say, after watching that trailer and just the tease that they're putting out there, it doesn't sell it for me. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, why are we back with these characters? It's like I said, it's really good to see Patrick Wilson again. I like him.
Yeah.
Josh
Facts.
Lambert's character is one of the best characters, not only in this franchise, but I feel like one of the best leading men in modern horror franchises. Like, you really feel for him in chapter 2. But the thing is I can't see it, man. I really can't. And this trailer did not hit for me.
Yeah, the issue is coming up with a good story. That's the hard part. And I felt like The Last Key had done some good storytelling, but I thought the script was kind of weak in a lot of it. Hopefully, with this one, they can fix that. But the other thing, too, is, these haunted house movies, Conjuring 3, for example, it was fine, but I have no urge to go see it again. Like, it was fine for what it was. They did some new stuff, but ultimately these horror movies have to try something new to keep the franchise going. And I don't want it to become like Hellraiser, where after part 2, the rest of them are just trash. Then they become a joke. Here in this case, I think that because Lee Whannell's still involved, I feel a bit better about it because that is kind of his universe. So I'm not too worried. I'm gonna go see it, but it's just I want them to really explain to us why we're back with the family. And if they give us a good explanation that I like, then fine. Or maybe you won't like it. I don't know. But there needs to be that, and then we need to actually figure out how to move past it if necessary. Or for all intents and purposes, they could do a Fast and Furious and bring the Lambert family back in a future movie when all the protagonists all come back to face off all the antagonists again, bro.
Well, yeah, I
Wacky.
mean, super wacky. But
But it's been
let me ask
done.
you let me ask you this though. That's a really good point. Is is this going to be a start of a Lambert trilogy or multiple sequels that they want to do, or are they just bringing them back for one movie? Because that's a
Good.
hard question.
I have no clue.
I have no idea. I honestly have no clue. And you feel like from the trailer that this is a situation that could potentially be resolved within this one movie. And the problem then is where do you, if it's successful, where do you go with the next one, right? This isn't an it's an interesting concept the further, but it's not an expansive universe. You don't have a whole lot of characters or situations to explore. Maybe if they had gone the direction that they kind of teased at the end of part two,
Right.
where you were going to introduce more characters and more situations and go into the further with the different like monsters and everything, maybe then. But we've been so self-contained and we have boiled this entire concept down to the most basic familial drama possible. It's a little bit more difficult to then explore.
Right, right. I mean, we'll see because they might wrap all that up in this movie. For all we know, they might actually show us what happened to Lin Shaye's character to Elise when she fought that demon at the end of two, and where she's been since then. Because the VHS tape thing does seem concerning because she should be in the movie because she, spoilers if you haven't seen the first movie, she does die. Then she gets the
Mhm.
powers in the further. So she has to be there in spirit, no pun intended, helping them out. So it would make sense because this is ultimately her franchise. So check out KRW. Anything else?
No, I'm good. Thanks, man.
Yep, thank you. And let us know what you think about the fifth Insidious film. I'm sure I'll do a tier list when it comes out and we'll compare and contrast. Take care. See you soon.